Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. Here's your look at the NECA Toys Back to the Future Part 2, Ultimate Doc Brown. Marty McFly and Doc Brown experience the adventure of a lifetime in an unlikely time machine as they travel to the past, the present, and the future, setting off a time-shattering chain reaction that disrupts the time-space continuum. Suppose before we get things started for Ultimate Doc Brown from BTTF Part 2, that's Back to the Future 2. The first thing we're going to want to do is take this tape measure of mine and measure to the very top of the figure. That will, of course, give us the proper calculations for how tall this figure actually stands. Is that really how it works? Science. Science is a wonderful thing. We're going to move this over. Just going to of course, not hit it with the laser, because that's not going to help much at all. Instead, we're going to stop it right there. And Ultimate Doc Brown from Back to the Future Part 2 stands 8.2 inches in height. Switching that over to centimeters, then you're looking at the figure standing 20.9 centimeters tall. A big muchos gracias to the folks over at NECA Toys that provide this sample of Back to the Future Part 2 Doc Brown that we could have a look at in this review. He's available right now through various retail stores and online if you're looking to pick this one up for yourself. And to get some size comparisons going, we can bring in the original Doc Brown, the one from the 50s, of course. The only thing that's missing now is the one from the 80s. I'm hoping that's going to happen sometime soon. And of course, I've freed up space to the other side of Doc Brown because, of course, we're going to be looking at Back to the Future Part 2 Doc Brown. And, of course, you're going to want to have him displayed with Back to the Future Part 2 Marty McFly. Boy, it's nice to be getting some Back to the Future figures from the NECA Toys, and so far I've been happy with what we've been getting from the lot. Again, I can't help to draw the attention to the fact that, yes, we do have a 50s Doc Brown. Yes, we do have now the 2000s Doc Brown. It's strange to really say that because we're now in that future, minus, of course, the hoverboards. We don't have yet an 80s Doc Brown. Hopefully that's something that they're going to rectify in the not-so-distant future. Doc will come with the following accessories. Slightly, unfortunately, crumpled by the way I removed it out of the packaging, but he does come included with the USA Today, indicating that Marty McFly Jr. has been arrested for theft. Well, we can always certainly fix that. But unfortunately, though, the paper, being that it's literally made of paper, got a little crumpled when it was inside of a clear envelope just behind the figure's clamshell tray. I probably could flatten this out, but I guess it really does play then into the idea that it is paper after all, but the longevity of this, I'm sure this paper isn't going to last very long. Usually, as I've seen with previous things that are released as paper, they don't hold up that well. That outline cutout that came included with the Super Freddy, was it Super Freddy? I don't even know what's happened to that. That's vanished somewhere. Yes, it's nice to get it on an actual material that the paper would have been made from. But yeah, again, these don't hold up very well. You may want to store this in a place flat enough that you're not going to damage it later on. Moving that to the side, Doc Brown, of course, comes with his emergency cache. It's a plastic, although in the movie it would have been metal. And on both sides, as you can see, it's been applied with emergency cache. Not probably the best thing if you don't want somebody to be stealing it. You probably should have put like emergency, I don't know, celery stalks or something that somebody's going to be like, oh, I don't want celery stalks, so I'm just going to avoid picking this one up. But actually, it does certainly live up to its name. You can open it up. And on the inside, I love this. You get all the various different money from 1955, 1923, 1917, 1864, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read every single one of them. But the fact that you get all these denominations from the different timelines is really a nice touch. I love the fact that they included that. Whether you could actually go in there and remove the paper would be another thing. I would imagine it looks like they're labels and not actually paper. You can, of course, fit that into his hand, which will involve swapping out the hands, because right now he's got a pair of relaxed hands. But before we do that, he also comes included with little binoculars. Lately, it seems that NECA Toys are big into doing replicas. And if they're thinking about doing eventually Back to the Future replicas, I mean, things that I would certainly be on board for is like the Pepsi bottle from the 2000s, from the future, Back to the Future 2. Another thing would be fun is to get the binoculars. And you can see there's the binoculars on the one side. It even has the little bit of yellow along the top area here as well. And these can also fit into his hand. I guess while we're all certainly talking about hands, we might as well actually bring these hands in. He comes with a couple, let me just put this down for a second. Comes with a couple of like grabbing hands, specifically designed for holding things, like for example the binoculars. You can kind of just, it may involve prying the fingers just a little bit away from the thumb. Now, of course, if this helps a little bit, you can also heat this up with a hairdryer. But yeah, you can fit it in between his thumb and his fingers. And you can do the exact same thing as well with the briefcase. Take the briefcase handle carefully, and just fit it into his thumb, or just fit it around his thumb, I should say. Just like that. And you can hold the briefcase that way as well. I know it's a little strange right now. We're seeing it certainly just floating, this floating, wandering aimlessly hand. It probably would make some sense to actually put it onto the figure. Things you will want to be careful of, though, talking about the hands, is that the wristwatches are separate pieces. I'm not really sure why they had to be separate pieces and why they wouldn't have just not molded it to the arm. I can't imagine that they would be using these arms for something else for a character that doesn't have a wristwatch. Because when you're doing the hands, when you're removing the hands, like say for example you take this one off here, you have to very carefully hold the wristwatch, because if you don't, the wristwatch will fall off. I'm just very carefully grabbing it right there so you guys can see it. That, I'm sure, will fall off onto the floor and you're never going to find it. And you just only hope that you don't have a little tiny kitten that loves to grab things. Oh, wait, I've got a tiny little kitten that loves to grab things. So I will want to be super, super careful. But that's what it looks like with Doc Brown actually holding the case in hand. And again, you can do the exact same thing on the other side. You have the appropriate hand to do the job. So let's go ahead and take that out of his hand. The last of Doc Brown's accessories involves some swappable heads. And as quickly as I put down Doc Brown, I'm going to now have to pick him back up again, because I want to show you the one that he comes out of the packaging with. This is the one that he has with the goggles. The neat thing about the goggles, though, while they don't appear to be removable, if you flip the figure up just a little bit, I don't know if you can actually see it or not without banging the camera in the process, but it looks like they've actually sculpted, maybe not his eyes, but certainly they've sculpted enough of the finished face underneath it that you would imagine then the goggles would be removable. Although, again, it doesn't seem like they are removable, but one good thing about it, one quick last look at his face. He does have the lighter hair, which is something we'll compare with the 50s Doc Brown in a second. It's sort of a mixture of whites and a little bit of yellow in there as well. It looks like almost his hair's been iced. Somebody's just taken a piping bag and iced his hair. He's got the stubble there on his face. A nice looking head sculpt, but there is other options available as well. You have just the regular surprised look on his face, which really doesn't deviate too far away from the mouth that he's already got on this head sculpt. Again, the only thing that's different is the eyes. Again, the zany looking hair on a lighter colored scale. Really nice looking head sculpts though. And then the last head sculpt, which is almost for me a hard-pressed decision to decide which one I actually like to display more, so I kind of really like this head sculpt as my personal favorite of the batch. Unfortunately, though, you can probably already see I've got a little bit of additional paint that's settled its way onto its cheek. You're probably asking yourself, well, why wouldn't you have already taken it off before this review? Just for the risk that if I did take it off, would there be plastic underneath? And me not wanting to go in there and touch that up myself when matching a proper color, I've decided to leave it on for the time being. Far enough away, I don't even see that it's there until everybody keeps pointing. Yeah, you got a big blob on your cheek. To swap out the head sculpts, by the way, just go ahead and take the existing head and just wiggle it off. This figure does utilize a ball peg as opposed to a post system. And then from there, you can go ahead and replace with another head and just again fit that over top of the ball joint. If you are having difficulties, by the way, at any given point, trying to get the heads back into place, heat the bottoms of the heads with a hairdryer, just enough to soften up the plastic, and then you can get the head properly back into place. I'm sure somebody is going to be asking this question, so let's answer that right now. Somebody's like, well, what's the question? If we take an existing Doc Brown, the original one from the 50s, which was one of my favorite figures, I think from the time frame that we were looking at this figure, Doc Brown definitely has a bang-on likeness, if you ask me, to Christopher Lloyd. And if you had wondered, could you swap the head sculpts off? Unfortunately, you can't. I'm going to take one of the other ones here. This is the one that came with the 50s Doc Brown that had, of course, the bandage on the top of his head. And I just want to pop the head off for the time being. If you try to replace this head, it seems like the hole is too big on the older Doc Browns. And it seems like then if you're trying to take this head sculpt and use it with the 50s Doc Brown, then it seems like the ball peg is too small. They're close, but they're not quite. To be fair, really, though, I mean, the coloring of his hair is going to be a specifically different color anyways. I mean, again, if you look at this one, the one from the 50s is clearly more blonde. The one from the 2000s is clearly more white. But just in case you guys were curious. Okay, so now that we've had a look at the head sculpts, all three of them, and unfortunately with a little bit of paint that's on the side of his cheek, happy again with all the head sculpts, really hitting a likeness, I feel, of actor Christopher Lloyd, we can certainly look at the rest of his body. Now, the rest of his body consists of this longer yellow jacket. I wonder if some of you may think to yourself, what if we use this with April O'Neil? Because April O'Neil, unless you get the collector's edition or the deluxe edition, she isn't going to come with her raincoat. I suppose you probably could, although, of course, there's things that are going to be quite different about Doc Brown's, not to mention he has much larger arms. So that's not going to look the most realistic when you put it on April O'Neil's smaller framed body. The jacket, for the most part, is painted well. I mean, it's kind of more of a darker mustard yellow, and I like the fact that while it isn't, of course, material, they've put the seams on there as if indicating that it is made of material. And that's a nice touch, considering that is, after all, just plastic. Underneath the jacket, mind you, again, he's got the patterned red shirt and the clear tie. I gotta give myself one of these clear ties one day, and I guess apparently, based on where we are in the time frame, I should be able to go to a store right now and get that, along with a hoverboard. Yeah, we can't get a hoverboard right now. He does have the checkerboard, almost basket woven pants in a similar mustard yellow to the jacket, not as shiny, mind you, of course. And of course, he does have his footwear as well, which has all these, I don't know, they're devices of some sort all around his footwear. The thing that concerns me the most are these antennas that are on the backs of the figure's boots. As you can already see, these are softer plastic, and they are separate from the rest of his footwear. So if you're not careful, you clip this in any way, picking up the figure and you're just bending the feet, for example, you could accidentally press down on these and snap these right off. We're going to stick with this head sculpt for the rest of the figure's review as we look at the figure's articulation. For the figure's articulation, the head is on a ball joint and it rotates all the way around. It hinges down and it hinges up, and yes, probably could have put that down a little bit more than what I did. One other thing I could also say is that the coloring of the neck doesn't seem to be the same coloring as his face. It's pretty close, but it's just off slightly. As for the arms hinge out at almost a 90-degree angle bend. You can rotate the arms all the way around. And it sort of makes the same sound as when you are wearing a real raincoat. Kind of that creaking, kind of rubbing up against itself sound, because of course this is softer plastic that they're using. He has a hinge joint in the elbow, which then allows the forearms to rotate back and forth. The hands rotate also all the way around. Be careful, again, not to lose those wrist watches. The legs split out. Oh, well, also, he does have technically something happening behind the scenes here, but because the shirt is more of a solid plastic, it really doesn't seem, it seems like there's almost a hint, just the suggestion that there's a swivel or something happening underneath all this. Because the material, though, is a little bit thicker, it's a little harder to get really access to it. So kind of just write it off that this figure doesn't have any torso articulation. He does have, however, legs on the splitting legs, of course. You can bring those out. You can bring the legs forward, bring them back. He has a bend at the knee, a bend on the knee. This one's a little tighter than this one here. The lower leg rotates back and forth. I was just talking earlier about being careful about those antennas. So carelessly, I was moving the leg back and forth. But speaking of the feet rotate, and they're actually attached underneath the pant legs. They're pegged into place so you can actually independently rotate them on their own, mindful of those antennas. The feet move back and forth up and down this way, and you can also rock them back and forth too. So he has regular articulation, just, again, you'll be a little bit more careful. I would hope to think you're being a little bit more careful when it comes to moving those feet. All around, a nice-looking Doc Brown. That almost rhymed. Getting the figure again to stand. And again, we can bring in his past self. There he is next to the 50s Doc Brown. And again, we can bring in the Back to the Future Part 2 Marty McFly Jr. Or I guess you could just consider it Marty McFly. A nice batch of characters. We're so far into the Back to the Future 2 movie franchise. We are going to be getting Griff, is it Biff? It's Griff. I think it's Griff. We're going to be getting him in a future review. But of course, one thing that is still quite apparent, as we certainly are looking at the lineup right now, we have the 50s, yes. We have the 2000s, yes. Where, oh where, is the 80s Doc Brown? That's the only thing that's missing right now. I'm happy and thrilled to get both versions of Doc Brown, which really on their own are unique to one another. But again, the only thing that's really missing right now is 85 Doc Brown. Hopefully soon we'll get that figure as well. Pretty happy with what we've gotten here with the Back to the Future Part 2 Ultimate Doc Brown. He has what I feel are all the accessories that you should expect to get from a Part 2 Doc Brown. I can't think of anything that's really he's missing here, short of the actual DeLorean, which at some point I hope we actually get ourselves a full or in-scale DeLorean that can fit these Back to the Future figures that we've gotten so far. So far we have gotten that die-cast release, but it really wasn't of proper scale. I hope at some point, I know it's really settling on the idea of whether these sales on these figures are going to justify the idea that NECA Toys actually produce a in-scale DeLorean, but I hope at some point it is going to happen. I mean, the car is just as much as of a character as Doc Brown is, as Marty McFly is. Hopefully at some point we will be getting ourselves a DeLorean. But in the meantime, we have certainly the appreciation of having these figures to have on display. Doc Brown before, when we looked at the 50s version, I thought was one of the best head sculpts that we got from the Back to the Future. Right underneath that was probably the Biff. The Biff and Doc Brown were probably the best likenesses that we've gotten so far, and still continues that trend when we look at the Back to the Future Part 2 Doc Brown. He's a little bit older, though his hair's a little whiter, but I think the likeness that is still there for actor Christopher Lloyd. The other character, by the way, I was thinking of was Griff, who's actually featured at the bottom corner there of the packaging. Another Back to the Future 2 alumni that we are going to be getting in an, well, somewhat distant future release. Definitely very much excited for getting more Back to the Future figures, because there's certainly still a lot of characters that they can pull from the 3 films. And really thinking of the 3 films, we haven't really gotten any Back to the Future Part 3 characters yet. Hopefully, again, that's all stuff that NECA Toys are planning behind the scenes for future releases. Have you picked up the Back to the Future Part 2 Doc Brown? If you have, let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of the figure. If you're also new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and turn the bell notification on. A big thank you to the folks, by the way, at NECA Toys for providing the sample of the Back to the Future Part 2 Ultimate Doc Brown. Keep your peepers peeled to this channel, members of the mob, because there will in fact be more NECA reviews lined up and coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.